Hey everyone, tonight we dive into the intriguingly dubious realm of ancient Roman street cuisine. From oily thermopolia stalls to figs drenched in honey enjoyed beneath towering marble pillars, Roman fast food was more than just nourishment. It represented taste, social standing, and even survival, all combined into one enigmatic snack. So, before settling in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly appreciate the content I create. Also, share in the comments where you are watching from and what the time is there. It is always exciting to discover our community from every corner of the globe. Now, lower the lights, maybe switch on a fan for a gentle background breeze, and let's slowly embark on this adventure together. Imagine yourself walking down a sun-drenched Roman street in worn sandals, your tunic sticking to you inconveniently, with a pounding headache from having drunk 5 cups of diluted wine and making questionable choices at the bathhouse. You are not in the mood for a formal dinner or a serious discussion about roasting a pig or comparing olive types with neighbors. No, you need something quick, greasy, and potentially regrettable, something that won't demand much attention and will not mind if you eat it with one hand while shooing away pigeons with the other. Welcome to the Thermopolium, Rome's wonderfully messy version of a fast food stand. Think of it like an ancient Taco Bell, but with grander marble counters and a little less flair. Food regulations appear simple at first glance. Stone countertops feature circular indentations, each holding a dolium. Large earthenware vessels are filled with whatever is hot, edible, and still good after the morning. There are no menus, no signs, no clear system, just a bubbling mixture of options, both literal and digestive. What do they offer? Fried cheese balls that squeak with every bite, suspicious sausage links that could be pork or simply hopeful guesses, a mysterious stew that might include lentils or merely look like it. Floating in everything like an invisible presence you can taste is garum, the Roman fermented fish sauce, acting both as seasoning and a social experiment. Cleanliness? It is better left unmentioned. The cook wears the very same tunic in which he spent the night, and the spoon he wields has witnessed at least 2 civil wars. Yet, the food is hot, salty, and packed with enough calories to carry you through another afternoon of surviving in a crowd. Thermopolia were ubiquitous, especially in Pompeii, where almost every block featured one. Laborers, students, wandering poets, and bewildered tourists from Gaul all gathered at these counters, exchanging sesterces for meals that were quick, filling, and possibly against some laws. Yes, it may cause indigestion, but when the options are a cold onion or whatever is bubbling at the street corner, you trust your instincts and hope your body forgives you afterward. Having left the Thermopolium with your pride is slightly wounded, and a lentil marks a spot on your toga. You find yourself wandering through the bustling forum once again, and that familiar, ominous rumble starts in your stomach. All you crave is a quick bite, not a full meal, just something to munch on while pretending to pay attention to a lengthy speech about grain taxes. Enter roasted chickpeas, or as they were called in Roman streets, cicer aratinum, which sounds grand but really means little more than stones masquerading as food. Vendors hawk them from clay pots or small fabric sacks, competing in a lively chorus of sales pitches. These chickpeas were roasted over open flames until they achieved a texture somewhere between crunchy and gritty. They were heavily salted because salt was the Roman cure-all, used for preserving, seasoning, and masking unwanted flavors. Despite their tough texture, these chickpeas were incredibly popular. Soldiers munched on them during long marches, senators snacked between political dealings, and children chewed them as if rehearsing for grown-up life. They were inexpensive, filling, and long-lasting, making them perfect for tossing into a bag, a lunchbox, or even at an opponent's head during a gladiator fight. There was little variety, no spicy tang, no creamy dips, just a bowl of hard legumes dusted with salt and sometimes served warm, a treat considered quite indulgent at the time. Naturally, the Romans believed they were good for health. Chickpeas were believed to enhance vitality, support digestion, and inspire profound contemplation, which sounds suspiciously like a tale spun by a chickpea seller. Yet if it helped boost sales, why not? Occasionally you would encounter a tender one, slightly chewy and a bit grainy, and for a fleeting moment you might think, this is quite all right. Then you'd bite into the next and be reminded that Roman dentistry was still around 1,000 years away from addressing this issue. Nevertheless, for a modest sum, you received a snack that traveled well, lasted indefinitely, and gave you something to occupy your mouth during lengthy political speeches. In ancient Rome, that was worth every cracked tooth. Soon enough, your appetite craved a change, perhaps something sweet, soft, and less existentially crunchy. You spot a vendor offering a tray covered with gleaming golden spheres, shimmering under the sun. Approaching carefully, since sweets in Rome often concealed tricks, he hands you one with a playful wink, saying globally, "What are they?" Imagine deep-fried cheese balls drowned in honey. Surprisingly, this is not some Renaissance fair fantasy. Globuli were an authentic Roman dessert, prepared by blending ricotta-style cheese with flour, shaping the mixture into balls, frying them in oil, and then soaking them in honey as if they had committed a sin against restraint. These treats delighted with their sweet and savory profile, but lacked structural integrity. Bite too eagerly, and hot cheese would spray in the opposite direction, while the honey would stick you fast. Fingers held close together, ensuring that the rest of your day would involve either bees, dogs, or uncomfortable hand signals to passing senators. But make no mistake, globuli were wildly popular. The recipe is found in Apicius, which was the closest thing the Romans had to a cookbook, and they were considered a delicacy perfect for dinner parties, religious festivals, or impressing someone you hoped to charm with sweetness. The texture was unique. Imagine something crispy on the outside with molten cheese flowing on the inside. The flavor was a blend between a dessert and a cheesecake, with a bold attitude. The Romans never held back when it came to honey, so these treats were almost like candied cannonballs. Although these were not exactly common street snacks, frying cheese in oil required certain resources, so globuli were usually enjoyed at more upscale events. Picture a toga gathering ending with guests letting out satisfied groans, their tunics stained by cheese oil, while bees buzzed about like little waiters. One bite could either send you straight to culinary bliss or have you rushing to the nearest public fountain to clean your fingers. There was no middle ground. So, yes, while we today enjoy donuts, churros, and fried Oreos, the Romans already had globuli. In a way, they were ahead of us. Deep-frying cheese and coating it in sugar was not a new invention. It was a revival from the past. The only challenge was surviving the stickiness. Now maybe you want something more polished, less messy, and with a touch of refinement, perhaps even elegance. That is where the Roman solution for a gourmet dessert comes in. Dates filled with nuts were known as dulia domestica in ancient Ius recipes. These small treats appeared straightforward at first. Fresh dates, sticky and soft, resembling jam in texture, were pitted and stuffed with finely chopped almonds or walnuts. They were then drizzled with honey, rolled in it, or even completely soaked, depending on one's social rank and taste for extravagance. At a glance, they seemed like quaint, rustic sweets, something you'd proudly offer to a grandmother. Yet caution was advised. These bites were intensely dense, packed full of flavor, and could cause dental damage if left in the sun too long. These confections were far from delicate. Consider nature's candy transformed into a firm, edible block of energy. Although nobles frequently showcased these treats at banquets, they were not exclusive to the wealthy. Slaves and common workers sometimes enjoyed dried dates, especially during festivals when indulgence was permitted and digestive troubles overlooked. The texture was boldly dynamic. The date provided a chewy foundation, nuts contributed a crunchy element, and honey served as an ancient adhesive. Eating one demanded dedication and, ideally, solitude. They stuck stubbornly to teeth, fingers, clothing, and even strained friendships if someone claimed the last piece. From a nutritional standpoint, the combination was quite beneficial. Dates delivered high sugar and energy, nuts offered protein, and honey added sweetness and additional nourishment. This blend made Dulia domestica a flavorful and potent snack enjoyed across social classes with varying degrees of opulence and restraint. Well, honey instantly elevated everything to a touch of elegance. Romans believed it aided digestion, but honestly, they were mostly just excited to enjoy something sweet that did not come with bones inside. Additionally, these treats traveled exceptionally well, making them ideal gifts, offerings, or even last-minute apologies. Soldiers took them into battle. Lovers exchanged them like edible love letters, and when situations became tense, these sweets doubled as throwable items with just enough weight to make a statement. In the empire famed for conquering the known world, this was one of the most cherished desserts, sticky, gratifying, and somewhat hazardous. Now, let's take a sudden detour into the bazaar. If there is one Roman snack that still shocks today, it must be this one, stuffed dormice. Yes, small furry rodents with large eyes and an unfortunate fate of ending up on the tables of elite Romans. Think of it as the original clash between all-natural and indulgent. To be fair, not everyone consumed these glorified pet-like creatures. This was mainly a luxury for the wealthy. Common people survived on lentils and boiled onions. But if you belonged to the Roman aristocracy, the toga-wearing, poetry-reciting, villa-owning crowd, you definitely served dormice to guests. Not out of necessity, but purely for status. The dormice were fattened inside tiny terracotta jars called glaria, which were basically gymnasiums for mice with no exits. The objective was to plump them up. Plump and juicy, they were filled with minced pork, herbs, and nuts. Afterward, these were either roasted, coated in honey, or even both at once, because why stop at just crossing one culinary boundary when you can break through multiple? Guests would handle them carefully, as if trying to ignore the tail that remained attached. People described the taste as nutty, but that might just be a way to sound sophisticated. In reality, it probably tasted like greasy mice paired with poor choices. What is surprising is that these treats were not outlawed. In fact, dormouse farming was officially regulated, showing how common this practice was. The Romans wrote about them, joked about them, and even depicted them in elaborate mosaics, almost as if stating, "Here lies someone wealthy who also kept mice." The intriguing part is that despite how strange it sounds, these mice were considered delicacies, comparable to the Roman equivalent of the finest luxury food. They were extravagant, somewhat controversial, and morally questionable. So why did they eat them? Simply because they could, to show off, and because moderation in food was not fashionable in the Mediterranean elite. To us, this seems terrifying. To them, it was finger food served with flair. In a society where eating flamingo tongues was not even the weirdest dish available, crunchy honey-glazed dormice were rather mild. Surely you deserve something comforting, something golden, and definitely something that doesn't stare back at you. Enter the honey cake, known to the Romans as libum. Let me be clear, these were not your typical modern soft and airy sponge cakes. Nobody was sharing photos of these on social media. Roman honey cakes were dense and heavy, more like a sweet brick than a delicate dessert. They appeared in a variety of shapes and with different textures, ranging from somewhat spongy to so tough you might need a knife to cut through. The traditional libum recipe combined cheese, flour, and egg into a thick dough, which was formed into a neat little loaf and baked on a leaf. Because if you are not baking on foliage, can you truly call it Roman? After baking, these cakes were soaked in honey, not just drizzled or glazed, but completely drenched. This kind of honey bath would ruin your clothes and cause tension when only one piece remained. Honey was like liquid gold in Rome. It served many purposes: a sweetener, a preservative, a skincare remedy, and apparently the perfect fix for a questionable cake. The end result was a sticky, slightly tangy, cheesy, sweet delight that stuck to your fingers and your social status alike. These cakes were present at religious ceremonies, family events, and as offerings to household gods, which meant that sometimes your morning pastry doubled as a holy tribute. No stress there, right? Just like every Roman meal, there were social distinctions baked right in. Less wealthy households often used barley or rye, left out the cheese, and diluted the honey to make something barely deserving the name cake. Meanwhile, the wealthy added nuts, spices, and so much honey it could drown a centurion. But despite these differences, these cakes were adored by many. They were exactly the kind of food people cherished and enjoyed. Memories from childhood linger. Fought over at feasts and stored like bees, gather nectar in hives. These items were far from elegant or visually appealing, yet they were sweet, sticky, and could easily cause disputes over ownership. Picture yourself waking up in ancient Rome. The streets are bustling already. Your neighbor yells about a debt for an amphora, and your head aches from last night's single cup of watered-down wine that somehow became 4. You feel sluggish, penniless, and running late. Naturally, you reach for breakfast, but not eggs or fruit, nor a full meal. Instead, you opt for the traditional Roman morning ritual, stale bread soaked in wine. Indeed, it was common. The Romans called it sapo in vinum, a phrase that sounds magical but simply means bread in wine. The idea was simple. Old, hardened bread was used because fresh bread was either costly or mysteriously unavailable. The bread was torn into pieces and submerged in whatever wine-like liquid was at hand. This was not a meal of luxury or beauty, but rather Roman cereal without milk, sugar, or delight. Still, it fulfilled its purpose. The wine softened the rock-hard bread just enough to make it edible. It did not matter if the wine was red or white. If it was fermented grape juice and somewhat liquid, it was acceptable. Sometimes herbs or honey were added, but only for special occasions or when trying to impress someone who had already witnessed stranger meals like dormice. This breakfast was about necessity and practicality. Farmers ate it before long days tending fields. Laborers relied on it for sustenance as well. Before carrying bricks under the scorching sun, people consumed it. Thinkers enjoyed it while pretending to hold back tears in public. If coffee symbolizes the foundation of modern society, this was ancient Rome's lukewarm, wine-infused counterpart. Naturally, the upper class ridiculed it, yet secretly savored their own sophisticated versions made with matured wine, honeyed bread, and the smug look of someone pretending to rough it for the experience. However, for the ordinary Roman, this was the true beginning of the morning. Here is the surprising part. Occasionally, it was not even a breakfast item. Some simply dipped bread into wine repeatedly during meals, speeches, or casual listening at the forum. It was simultaneously nourishment, a beverage, and a way of life. Was it healthy? Barely so. Was it elegant? Hardly. But it was mild, inexpensive, and infused with alcohol, which in ancient Rome counted as a win. Now, sausages, humanity's timeless answer to the question, what to do with leftover bits. No culture embraced this meat craft with more enthusiasm than ancient Rome, where sausage making was less about strict recipes and more about exploring what could legally be classified as food. The Roman specialty was Lucanica, a sausage named for the Lucania region, though by the time it appeared in Roman markets, geography was no longer important. What mattered was that it was salty, oily, spicy, and oddly chewy. Regarding its ingredients, well, that's when things get intriguing. Lucanica often remained a delightful enigma. It consisted of pork scraps, liver, lungs, heart, and possibly ingredients better left unmentioned. Flavored with pepper, cumin, fennel seeds, and a pinch of daring, The mixture was then packed into intestinal casings and cooked by grilling, frying, or smoking to disguise the unsettling nature concealed inside. Romans were fond of these sausages. Street vendors would cook them openly on small braziers, filling the bustling city air with savory aromas. People queued wearing togas, coins ready, eager for their warm, greasy treat. Athletes consumed them for stamina. Philosophers ate them, then pondered their moral implications. Children begged for them only to regret it instantly. Naturally, the quality of these sausages varied significantly. At imperial banquets, they might be finely minced and gently seasoned. On the streets, however, it was better not to ask too many questions to stay content. Rumors spread about donkey parts or even dog meat being included. Certainly, there were organs unknown to any butcher's guide. Preservation was optimistic at best. Since refrigeration had not been invented, and smoking meat was more of an art than a precise technique, some sausages matured like fine wine, while others spoiled to a degree demanding official intervention. Nevertheless, these sausages were ubiquitous, available at cook shops, enjoyed in arenas, and carried by soldiers into combat. A Roman soldier crossing Gaul could expect two things: aching feet and a dried sausage tucked in his bag. It was calorie-packed, rich in flavor, and resilient enough to endure the march. Roman pancakes, or as they might have been referred to, flat letdowns with a hint of hope, served a dual purpose, including possible self-defense if required. The Laiteria, in theory, sounds promising. Its name suggests sweetness, and it was essentially a simple pancake made from spelt flour, eggs, and milk. Occasionally honey was included, sometimes it was not. This very unpredictability perfectly captures the emotional roller coaster this dish could provoke. The batter was mixed and poured into a pan over a fire that might or might not cooperate, then left to cook. Unlike the fluffy stacks and maple syrup we know today, Roman magic did not revolve around such delights. These pancakes were thin, dense, and tough enough to resemble edible tiles. If fortune smiled on you, they were fried with a touch of oil and topped with generous honey and perhaps a sprinkle of poppy seeds for festive occasions. If luck was absent, you ended up with a dry, plain version without sweetness and a texture closer to parchment paper. Despite this, they were popular, inexpensive, simple to prepare, and remarkably adaptable. They could be sweet or savory, enjoyed warm or cold, and served at celebrations, mourning ceremonies, or those uncomfortable moments between breakfast and remorse. Romans were not attempting a breakfast revolution. Their aim was merely to consume calories that did not cause trouble. But if you imagine a present-day pancake adorned with strawberries and whipped cream, you should immediately lower your expectations. These were quite the opposite. Cakes that demanded strong teeth and low emotional expectations served more as fuel than a treat, more a snack for stamina than a luxurious brunch. Yet they had their purpose. These cakes filled hungry stomachs, paired reasonably well with wine, and offered a brief sense of control in a world full of invasions, political betrayal, and mysterious meat sausages. That feeling, even if short-lived, was a precious comfort. Occasionally the batter would brown perfectly at the edges, the honey would caramelize just so, and you would think, "This is nearly good." That moment of unexpected pleasure was the true heritage of the Roman pancake, setting the bar low enough to pleasantly surprise those who tried it. So, were these pancakes dull? Absolutely. Were they somehow cherished? Also yes, because in ancient Rome, even mediocrity found its time to shine, preferably accompanied by honey. Roman cuisine had a certain straightforwardness. It never pretended to be refined or offered lean, trimmed portions. When it came to fish, Romans certainly did not bother with neat fillets or delicate servings. Instead, they embraced the less glamorous parts. Fried, salty, sometimes barely identifiable, but always crunchy. Picture yourself strolling the docks of Ostia or standing near a fishmonger's stall in Sabura. You catch a whiff of something sizzling, fishy, and likely left out since early morning. Following that scent, you find a greasy tray full of fried fish bits, generously coated with oil and perhaps flour or simply street dust. Nobody is really certain anymore. What exactly were they eating? Fish heads, tails, fins, and any small pieces that could be thrown whole into a pan. Anchovies were especially popular, as were sardines. Sometimes the Romans explored the realm of unknown seafood by frying whatever creature accidentally landed in their nets that day. The cooking process was straightforward. Heat some oil, drop the fish in, and hope they crisp up before burning. Add a pinch of salt, or a splash of vinegar if you felt a bit fancy. The food was either served wrapped in a fig leaf or handed directly to the customer if cleanliness was optional, which, honestly, it usually was. These tiny, crunchy sea creatures were found everywhere. Thermopolia featured them on the menu. Market vendors boasted about them loudly. Children bought them as quick snacks, and everyone understood that frying them until crispy meant you did not need to wonder which part of the fish you were eating. They offered decent nutrition too, omega-3 fatty acids, protein, and calcium from the crunchy bones you chewed through, plus a faint aroma of the Mediterranean that lingered for days. But here is the real charm. People adored this food. The Romans were not aiming for refinement. They sought salt, fat, and crunch. These fish bits delivered those qualities boldly, greasily, in a way that signaled your stomach with a clear, "Yes, I am satisfied," and your pride with an unspoken, "We do not discuss this." By now you have tasted bread soaked in wine, sausage packed with mysterious ingredients, and a pancake so tough it could be considered a building material. Maybe you are ready for more ancient flavors. Craving something wholesome, something fruity, something that makes you feel like you made a wise choice today? Enter the Roman fig cake, or as some modern historians prefer to call it, the ancient craft of transforming leftovers into deliberate treats. Figs were everywhere in Rome, plentiful, inexpensive, and so fragile that Romans had roughly 3 hours to enjoy them before they fermented. So what did they do with the extras? They mashed them into fig cakes, small lumps of crushed fig, sometimes mixed with nuts or flour, occasionally shaped into discs, and almost always served as dessert. The texture was quite bold, chewy, sticky, and somewhat unsettling if not stored properly. The flavor depended greatly on how long the figs had been resting in the sun. In the best case, they were rich and naturally sweet. In the worst, they developed a tangy taste that one might generously describe as surprising. Sometimes honey was added, which improved the flavor, and other times it was left out, which did not. Some versions included sesame seeds, creating a snack that clung to your teeth like emotional baggage. Others were wrapped in leaves for easy carrying and a hint of mystery. Despite their modest origins, fig cakes were popular among all social groups. Farmers took them to the fields. Philosophers nibbled on them while debating others. Even the wealthy enjoyed them, though their versions came spiced and with a touch of elegance. At festivals, fig cakes were often handed out to crowds much like ancient granola bars. Because they resisted spoilage so well, fig cakes quickly became the preferred choice for offerings to deities, household spirits, and even that particular neighbor you disliked but had to be courteous toward. Let's be honest, fig cakes were never celebrated as luxurious treats. No one was composing heartfelt verses about them, yet their dense texture provided ample nourishment and remarkable versatility. They were the culinary embodiment of "it will suffice." In a culture where desserts were often sticky messes or prone to sliding off your plate, the modest fig cake stood out as a dependable option. It did not dazzle or command attention, but it was steady and uncomplaining. In some cases, that reliability alone was invaluable. By this stage of your Roman food adventure, you have sampled enough fermented, fried, and honey-soaked delights to feel uncertain about your decisions. However, Do not fret, because there remains one of Rome's most beloved passions to explore, cheese, particularly in snack form. These cheese bites could either bring joy or immediate regret. In ancient Roman society, cheese was not merely sustenance, it was an ideology. Varieties ranged from soft and creamy to hard and aged, and some cheeses might even be classified as biological threats by today's criteria. Romans delighted in nibbling on cheese between meals, or more precisely, between other questionable choices. One popular favorite was fried cheese patties. These snacks were commonly found in thermopolia and taverns, created by blending soft cheese similar to ricotta with flour or semolina, shaping small discs, and frying them in oil until golden. Golden sounds delicious, does it not? It was, but only when enjoyed warm. Let them sit for 5 minutes, and suddenly you found yourself chewing something with the consistency of a worn-out sandal. Some were sweetened with honey, others infused with herbs that made them boldly savory. Occasionally, someone would add nuts or dried fruits, which in theory seemed creative, but often ended up tasting like a mix-up between trail mix and melted cheese. If your luck was particularly bad, you might come across aged Roman cheese. This was not your soft French brie or mild cheddar. No, it was hard, strong-smelling, and often described as fragrant, an ancient warning not to breathe in too deeply. Some types were matured until they became saltier than cheesy. Others were kept in baskets, left in the sun, and perhaps even used as a way to deter unwanted visitors. Cheese snacks were everywhere, given to soldiers, shared at festivals, and even presented as gifts during Saturnalia, because nothing says, "I appreciate you," quite like a block of dairy tough enough to double as a writing surface. They were hearty, inexpensive, and remarkably long-lasting, provided you did not mind the occasional surprise. Despite their quirks, the Romans loved these cheese treats. They were comforting, easy to carry, and only sometimes menacing. In essence, they were like the mozzarella sticks of antiquity, just without mozzarella or sticks. Different cultures have ketchup or hot sauce, but ancient Romans had these cheesy snacks. In ancient Rome, they had garum, a fermented fish sauce that somehow found its way onto, inside, or near almost every edible item throughout the empire. To be frank, garum was far from delicate. It was not refined or something you casually drizzled over your food. This sauce was essentially fish guts, packed into clay jars, heavily salted, and then left under the sun until fermentation silenced any signs of life. The outcome was a brownish, oily, salty, and tangy liquid that Romans generously poured over meats, vegetables, grains, and even snacks. Bread dipped in garum? Certainly. Roasted nuts with a touch of garum? Why not? Fried cheese with a splash of garum? That is daring, yet that sums up Roman cooking perfectly. But garum was more than just a flavor enhancer. It carried social status. Different qualities existed, ranging from those for the common folk to rare varieties aged longer than a typical gladiator's career. Types such as liquamen and alec circulated across the empire with labels promoting their origins, purity, and likely exaggerated health benefits. Consider garum as the ancient Roman equivalent of artisan organic soy sauce, but made with more fish innards. It is worth noting that the stench from producing garum was so unbearable that laws confined its factories outside city boundaries. Yes, even in Rome, where sewage was openly discharged and public baths were more experimental than hygienic, garum production was strictly prohibited within residential areas. Nevertheless, once bottled and distributed, it became a prized commodity, treasured by emperors. Cooks swore by this ingredient. Hungry Romans spread it generously over almost anything that was not alive. It was the city's top flavor enhancer and its most commonly accepted culinary audacity. Did people really enjoy it? Apparently, yes. They celebrated it in poetry, included it in recipes, and even wrote love notes for dishes that began by drowning everything in fermented fish sauce. Was it good for you? Perhaps. Was it intense? Always. Did it add a unique charm to street food, fried to perfection? If you are a fan of strong, fishy, and slightly mysterious flavors, definitely yes. So when picturing Roman fast food, do not just think of cheese balls or fig pastries. Imagine those snacks drenched in pungent garum, because that was the flavor of victory in ancient Rome. If you still fancy a bite, something easy and crunchy that fits neatly in one hand while you dramatically wave the other at passing senators, consider Roman street nuts. Strolling through any lively Roman market, the Forum, the Port of Ostia, or the hidden corners of Subura, you would hear distinct sounds of nuts roasting over open flames. Not the cozy aroma from holiday kitchens, but more like a mixture of smoky street vendors' carts and salty temptation. The options included almonds, walnuts, hazelnuts, and pine nuts, although the latter could be quite pricey and might embarrass you if spilled. Most were roasted, lightly salted, and occasionally enhanced with herbs or honey. Simple, yet irresistible, these snacks kept Romans coming back for more. Affordable and portable, vendors offered nuts in small paper cones crafted from recycled wax. Sometimes these cones were fashioned from scraps of papyrus or tablet fragments that still bore grocery lists or haphazardly written bad poetry. This added a little extra amusement for the buyers. The Romans truly adored nuts. Philosophers munched on them while contemplating the meaning of life and death. Gladiators consumed them to boost their protein intake. At lively parties, guests eagerly tossed nuts into their mouths and sometimes into the amphorae, with varying success. Even emperors nibbled on nuts, but theirs were peeled, gilded, and likely brought to them on a silver platter by an anxious servant. Some nuts were even candied, coated with honey, resembling peanut brittle, and capable of both breaking a tooth and winning your heart, depending on their freshness. Naturally, there were drawbacks. Consuming too many nuts, especially those dusted with spicy garam masala, could cause indigestion, social embarrassment, and even prompt dramatic readings of one's last will and testament. Yet nobody was deterred because nuts sold on the streets provided a quick, inexpensive, and deeply satisfying snack. They were essentially the first Roman vending machine. Insert a coin and receive a handful of crunchy pleasure. No complicated procedures, no mystery meats, just salty joy in a bustling city energized by wine, ambition, and chaotic daily life. You have celebrated like a senator, soaked in wine, sung off-key at a Saturnalia feast, and maybe kissed someone who was your cousin's cousin's slave. Now, morning has come. Your toga is still on. Feeling queasy with a garum-like taste lingering in your mouth and questionable decisions weighing on you signals a need for help. Yet, in ancient Rome, aid did not come wrapped in aspirin or a strong black coffee. Instead, what awaited was a semi-medicinal heroic snack, paired with a hopeful prayer that Jupiter still favored you. Welcome to the world of hangover remedies Roman style. First to the rescue was the all-encompassing wine-soaked bread. Yes, once again, because what could possibly fix a catastrophe born of wine better than infusing more wine into a stale loaf so dry it might scrape your gums raw? Alternatively, one might be offered a raw egg blended into spiced wine called pusca ovata. Imagine it as a primitive protein shake, absent refrigeration, cleanliness, or any hint of pleasure. Down it goes accompanied by a grimace, while you listen to someone older than the Republic assuring you it restores your humoral balance. Still feeling sluggish, it was snack time, straight from Etruscan Inferno olives, garlic vinegar, soaked onions, and perhaps a morsel of pickled fish, since nothing clears the senses, quite like salty brine mixed with regret. Among famous choices was fried cabbage with cumin and oil, reputed as miraculous but realistically greasy, pungent, and more likely to cause trouble than cure it. Roman physicians believed in it deeply, while diners mostly cursed its presence. There were also sweeter alternatives, such as figs drizzled with honey and vinegar, or dates soaked in wine and sprinkled with pepper. These, to their credit, probably offered some relief since they were sugary hydrating, and just peculiar enough to divert attention from the pounding headache. And if all else failed, one could always brave a true gladiator's feast. A small handful of barley, a raw onion, and a firm strike to the chest to awaken your senses. No scientific explanation, just a mix of confidence and remorse. Of course, the Romans did not refer to it as a hangover. They described it as being troubled in the mind, which honestly sounds more precise. Although their remedies varied in effectiveness, they had faith in them, with the same passion they had for considering fried dormice a delicacy. So there you find yourself, hunched over a thermopolium counter, sipping spiced vinegar and nibbling on cabbage while pleading with Bacchus for relief. Welcome to the Roman way of recovery. Before becoming the feared scourge of Rome, and before elephants thundered across the Alps, Hannibal Barca was merely a boy, wide-eyed, clever, and already hardened by a thirst for vengeance. The era is approximately 237 years before the Common Era. Carthage, once the proud power of North Africa, had just suffered defeat in the First Punic War against Rome. The one feeling this loss most deeply was Hamilcar Barca, the boy's father. He was not simply a general. He embodied Carthage's spirit of defiance. Fierce, cunning, and deeply wounded by Rome's triumph, he was far from surrendering. When Hamilcar decided to leave for Iberia, modern-day Spain, to restore Carthage's might and establish a new empire, he took his 9-year-old son along. However, this was no ordinary journey. It was an initiation. According to legend, before setting off, Hamilcar led Hannibal to the temple of Baal and made him place his small hand on a bloodied sacrificial altar. At that moment, he compelled his son to pledge a solemn vow never to ally with Rome, never to accept, tolerate, or befriend it. Imagine that upbringing. Few children grow up learning arithmetic, swordsmanship, and a lifelong grudge simultaneously as their education. Yet Hannibal's childhood was unlike any other. His school was a military camp, his teacher a general, and his lessons all about vengeance. As they advanced into the Iberian Peninsula, Hannibal observed and absorbed everything. He witnessed his father triumph in savage battles, forge unstable alliances, and gradually seize land inch by inch. Every Roman envoy that came probing was carefully noted by Hannibal, as was every failed negotiation and each Carthaginian soldier who sacrificed blood on foreign earth. By the time his father passed away and command was transferred to Hannibal's brother-in-law, Hasdrubal, the young boy was already resilient. When Hasdrubal was killed years later, Hannibal, now 26 years old, was chosen by the troops to lead. It was not the Senate or the elders who appointed him, but the soldiers who had seen him grow, fight, and take charge. At that instant, the childhood oath transformed into a man's mission. Although Rome had won the initial conflict, Hannibal Barca was ready to overturn everything they believed about both warfare and dread. Without delay, Hannibal assumed control of the Carthaginian army in Iberia and initiated a ruthless, devastating campaign that would cause Rome to recoil across the sea. He started with the tribes of Hispania, who were fractured, proud, and constantly at odds with each other. Instead of charging in as a conqueror, Hannibal chose to use diplomacy, marriage alliances, and bribery to gain the support of some tribes. For those who resisted, he employed force. The tribes that stood against him were subdued through a combination of tactical brilliance on the battlefield and psychological tactics. Hannibal did not merely fight battles, he orchestrated them carefully. He would let a section of his army pretend to retreat, only to then outflank and encircle the enemy once they believed victory was within reach. He manipulated minds as skillfully as swords, earning the admiration of his soldiers. Hannibal shared their meals, marched alongside them, and fought in the heart of the conflict. He was no spoiled commander watching from a lavish chariot. He endured the same hardships and bled with them. This genuine connection inspired deep loyalty and at the same time instilled immense fear in overwhelming proportions. As Carthage's influence expanded in Iberia, Rome began to feel the strain. They had previously signed a treaty with Hasdrubal before his demise, which forbade Carthage from crossing the Ebro River. Yet Hannibal paid no attention to Roman legalities. He had far grander ambitions. Thus he set his sights on Saguntum, a city allied with Rome, located just to the south of the Ebro. Attacking it was more than courageous. It was essentially a declaration of war. Rome observed anxiously, uncertain if Carthage might control their audacious young general. Spoiler alert, they did not. The siege of Saguntum was relentless and effective. Hannibal cut off their supplies, leaving them to starve. They relentlessly attacked the city walls and ultimately seized control of the city. Those who survived were either killed or captured and sold as slaves. Rome had received its response. Hannibal was not bluffing and showed no fear. Naturally, the Roman Senate was furious. They insisted that Carthage surrender Hannibal for breaking the treaty. Carthage replied with collective indifference. The Senate engaged in heated discussions. The aristocrats argued among themselves, yet none possessed the courage or perhaps the willingness to restrain him. Hannibal had grown larger than Carthage itself. Now, with Iberia secured and Rome boiling with anger across the sea, he set his sights on Italy. He would not arrive by ship nor send a formal declaration of war, but rather perform the unimaginable. He intended to bring the conflict directly to Rome's doorstep using elephants. When Hannibal revealed his plan to invade Italy overland through the Alps, his commanders considered him mad. The Alps were far more than towering peaks. They were deathly traps, coated in snow, perilous, and full of hostile tribes. No rational commander would dare such a journey, especially with thousands of troops, supply animals, and a small troop of African war elephants. Yet Hannibal was not seeking reason. He aimed to inspire terror and astonishment. In the year 218 before the Common Era, he embarked on one of the boldest military campaigns in ancient times. Leading an army numbering roughly 50,000 men and 37 elephants, Hannibal marched northward from Iberia, crossing the Pyrenees Mountains, skirmishing with Celtic groups, and eventually reaching the River Rhone. At that point, he employed rafts and local guides to transport his elephants across the water. Yes, elephants traveling by raft. The complexity of the operation was unbelievable. Rome was completely unprepared. They anticipated his arrival by sea, or at most, through the known coastal pathways. Yet Hannibal was breaking all conventional rules without even reaching the mountainous Alps. When the climb finally began, every possible misfortune struck. Landslides buried their gear, snowstorms disoriented the soldiers, altitude sickness, along with biting winds and hunger, claimed thousands of lives. Provisions dwindled while spirits fell sharply. Desertion became common. Elephants lost footing on the frozen trails, tumbling down steep chasms. One soldier is said to have chipped away frozen horseshoes stuck in ice with a pickaxe. But Hannibal pressed forward. He inspired his troops by gesturing toward the distant Italian plains, promising fertile lands, loot, and vengeance against Rome. He harnessed fire to break ice, used vinegar to erode rocks, and relied on sheer determination to push his forces past nature's harshest challenges. After 2 grueling weeks, with barely half the original numbers still alive, Hannibal and his army reached the Po Valley, utterly worn out, frost-bitten, and battered. Meanwhile, in Italy and Rome, shock sunk in. No one had ever expected an enemy to approach so unexpectedly. The Alps were considered impassable, especially with elephants, yet Hannibal succeeded. What followed was more than a march. It was a clear warning. Rome was no longer secure. He was not going anywhere. I was there, and he had no intention of departing any time soon. As soon as Hannibal set foot on Italian territory, he wasted no time. Despite having a reduced army, he immediately began recruiting unhappy Celtic tribes in northern Italy, enemies of Rome. They joined his cause because Hannibal did not merely promise freedom, he demonstrated his commitment through bloodshed. Rome, shocked yet still proud, hastily dispatched legions to stop him. Consul Gaius Flaminius took charge, burning with the fierce pride of the Republic. He aimed for a quick and spectacular victory to restore Roman honor after Hannibal's audacious Alpine crossing. However, Hannibal had already selected the battlefield, and it would not bring glory to anyone wearing the red cloak. The site was Lake Trasimene, a misty, narrow valley bordered on one side by water and on the other by steep hills, an ideal setup for an ambush. Hannibal positioned his infantry up front as a visible lure while hiding his cavalry and elite soldiers in the hills, cloaked by the early morning fog. On the 21st of June in 217 before the Common Era, Flaminius charged forward, driven by impatience, arrogance, and complete ignorance of the looming danger. As the Romans marched into the snare, Hannibal unleashed the trap. His forces burst from the hills, hitting the Roman flanks hard. The cavalry cut off any chance of escape. The Roman line, stretched thin in the confined space, had nowhere to turn. Chaos erupted as Roman soldiers either drowned in the lake, were trampled while trying to escape, or were brutally slaughtered. Flaminius himself fell while trying to rally his disintegrating forces. Within only a few hours, 15,000 Romans had perished, and thousands more were taken prisoner. Remarkably, Hannibal did not lose a single officer. The ambush near Lake Trasimene became the largest and most effective ambush recorded in military history. Panic engulfed Rome. The streets echoed with cries and prayers. Mothers mourned deeply. The Senate, gripped by despair, appointed a dictator, Quintus Fabius Maximus, to manage the crisis. Yet Hannibal was far from done. He had invaded their territory, destroyed their legions, and now roamed Italy like a phantom, untouchable, and destroying everything before him. Despite this catastrophe, Rome refused to seek peace. That suited Hannibal perfectly. He did not desire peace. He aimed to disgrace them in the one realm they considered themselves unbeatable. On the battlefield, at the heart of their empire, his most deadly achievement had yet to unfold. If Lake Trasimene marked Hannibal's crowning ambush, then Cannae would become his symphony of destruction. By 216 BCE, Rome had abandoned all caution. There would be no more delay, no more defensive tactics. They assembled the largest force they had ever mustered, approximately 80,000 soldiers, led by the consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, double the number of Hannibal's troops. They did not plan to outsmart him. Their intention was to overwhelm him through sheer might. Hannibal understood this and grinned. He selected the battlefield, a broad expanse. Near the southern Italian town of Cannae, a vast plain stretched out, ideal for the swift movement and maneuvering of cavalry forces. Here, Hannibal positioned his troops in a formation that seemed deceptively straightforward. His most vulnerable infantry, mainly composed of Gauls and Spaniards, formed a shallow crescent in the center. On the sides, his stronger African infantry took their place, ready to strike. Even wider on both flanks, his cavalry, the true force of impact, spread out, waiting to execute the decisive blow. The stage was set for a masterful trap. When battle commenced in the early morning, the Roman army advanced in a compact and forceful column, determined to break through Hannibal's center. Initially, the crescent at Hannibal's core bent and gave way under the Roman pressure, pulling back without collapsing entirely. The Roman forces pushed ever deeper, confident of imminent victory as they moved into what appeared to be a weakening enemy line. But then the trap closed suddenly. Hannibal's African infantry on the flanks turned inward, surrounding the Romans on either side. Meanwhile, his cavalry, having already defeated the Roman horsemen, swung around to attack the enemy from behind. The Romans found themselves completely encircled, trapped with no options for retreat or respite. Only chaos and destruction awaited them. In the scorching August heat, Soldiers suffocated amid the crush of bodies, unable to wield their swords properly. Panic overtook the battlefield, and Hannibal's troops began a systematic slaughter, cutting down Roman soldiers mercilessly. This battle turned into one of the most one-sided massacres recorded in military history. It is estimated that between 50,000 and 70,000 Romans were killed in a single day, more than the entire population of many ancient cities. This disaster marked the gravest defeat Rome ever experienced and remains unforgettable to this day. One of the most lethal confrontations in history featured Hannibal, who chose not to advance on Rome. It was not due to inability, but because he understood the city would not collapse swiftly. He required additional forces from Carthage, siege machinery, and valuable time. Yet Carthage hesitated. Despite delivering Rome its bleakest moment, Hannibal found himself isolated. Meanwhile, Rome, nursing wounds, filled with desire for revenge and intense fear, was determined not to let him escape justice. After Cannae, merely uttering Hannibal's name could hush a Roman crowd. Mothers would scare their children by invoking his presence, warning that Hannibal was at the gates. Strangely, however, he never stormed the city. For 16 years, Hannibal wandered through the Italian hills and fields like a specter, undefeated, unpredictable, and completely unsupported by reinforcements. He earned the loyalty of many southern Italian towns and sowed disorder among Rome's allies. However, Carthage, despite its wealth, refused to provide the aid necessary to complete the conquest. The Senate was anxious about his expanding influence, and rivals at home whispered against him, worried about his ambitions. They preferred to let him drain Rome's strength gradually rather than empower him for one decisive blow. Consequently, Hannibal had to adjust. He mastered survival by engaging in guerrilla-style encounters, disrupting supply routes, destroying harvests, and always remaining just beyond the Roman grasp. Meanwhile, Roman forces led by Fabius Maximus, known as the Delayer, refused to engage in direct battle. They tracked Hannibal stealthily, avoiding clashes, and denied him chances to gain the upper hand. Despite this, Hannibal managed to achieve significant victories that kept Rome under constant pressure. Hannibal achieved remarkable victories. He overwhelmed Roman troops at Hardonia, ambushed them in Apulia, and even annihilated entire consular armies that dared to pursue him. He managed to accomplish this without ever losing a significant battle. However, the course of time started working against him. Rome, though battered, remained persistent and adjusted its strategy. They formed additional legions, trained fresh commanders, and reinforced their alliances. While Hannibal roamed with a steadily shrinking army, Rome extended its influence like a hydra sprouting new heads, causing the focus of the war to shift. Rome launched an invasion of Iberia to cut off Carthaginian supply routes. Hannibal's own brother Hasdrubal attempted to bring support by crossing the Alps, as Hannibal had done years earlier. Yet Rome intercepted and crushed Hasdrubal's forces and cruelly threw his severed head into Hannibal's camp to send a clear message: "You are alone now." Hannibal's vision of undermining Rome from inside was fading fast. He had transformed Italy into a tomb for legions, but lacking reinforcements, siege weapons, and political support, he was unable to strike the final decisive blow. Despite everything, Hannibal refused to retreat. He had promised his father during his youth that he would never befriend Rome, and he upheld that vow every year he stayed on their soil. Yet soon, Rome would launch an attack not in Italy, but directly on Carthage's own shores. Hannibal would then have no alternative but to return home for the ultimate confrontation. By the year 203 before the Common Era, the momentum had completely shifted. Rome had clawed its way back from near disaster and defeated Hannibal's forces. Strongholds in the Iberian Peninsula had been secured, and the battle was taken directly to North Africa. Leading the assault was Scipio Africanus, a young and brilliant commander who had studied Hannibal's strategies with great dedication. Rome was no longer willing to wait patiently. Their goal was to obliterate Carthage entirely. To safeguard itself, the Carthaginian Senate had to make an extraordinary decision. They called Hannibal back home. After 16 years of legendary campaigns in Italy, Hannibal left the land for which he had shed so much blood. He returned to Carthage to protect a city that had forsaken him and to confront a leader skilled in Hannibal's own style of warfare. The decisive confrontation occurred at Zama in 202 BCE. On this occasion, the forces were almost equally matched. Hannibal commanded an army composed of seasoned veterans, conscripts, and 80 war elephants. Meanwhile, Scipio led disciplined Roman legions supported by Numidian cavalry, effectively commanded by Massinissa, a former Carthaginian ally who had defected. Hannibal initiated the battle with a massive elephant charge intended to break the Roman ranks. However, Scipio had anticipated this move. He instructed his soldiers to part their lines, creating passageways that allowed the elephants to move through without causing destruction. Many elephants became frightened or simply passed harmlessly amid the Roman formations. Some even retreated, crushing Hannibal's own troops in their path. What followed was an intense clash of infantry. Hannibal's veterans fought with great courage, managing to push back the initial Roman front lines. Yet, when Scipio's cavalry attacked from the sides and then from the rear just as planned, the tide of battle turned decisively. What Hannibal achieved at Cannae was reversed completely. The Carthaginian forces fell apart and the roles switched around. Hannibal, who was once the expert in surrounding his enemies, now found himself surrounded. Carthage had no option but to surrender. The conditions of surrender were harsh. They were required to relinquish their navy, pay a huge reparation sum, and vow never to engage in war without Rome's approval. Hannibal faced defeat. However, this was more than just a loss in battle. It signified the end of a dream. His lifelong goal to weaken Rome's dominance over the Mediterranean ended in the dusty plains of North Africa. Still, despite his downfall, Rome chose not to kill him because they feared creating a martyr. Instead, they allowed him to live, fully aware that his story was far from over. Hannibal Barca's impact on history was not finished. Upon returning to Carthage, Hannibal did not come back as a beaten commander, but as a determined survivor. Although the defeat at Zama had shattered Carthage's military strength, Hannibal retained great esteem. The citizens viewed him not as the man who lost the conflict, but as the one who almost won against overwhelming challenges. So, what path did Hannibal take next? He transformed himself into a statesman. Yes, the same man who once led elephants across the Alps now took a seat in the Carthaginian Senate, working against corruption, overhauling financial policies, and striving to rebuild a broken nation. He reduced taxes, cleared public debts, and rejuvenated Carthage's economy. He quickly gained recognition as a clever but often controversial reformer. Yet Rome remained watchful, never far from the action. They were more afraid of Hannibal's intellect than his sword. A powerful Carthage, even if peaceful, posed a danger as long as Hannibal commanded it. Therefore, Rome falsely accused him of plotting with enemy powers. Trapped once again, Hannibal fled. This marked the beginning of his second phase, a life of a hunted exile. He journeyed from one throne to another, offering his strategic brilliance to foreign rulers. First, he approached Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, Rome's latest adversary. Hannibal attempted to unite them for a fresh great war, but Antiochus dismissed much of his counsel and suffered a resounding defeat. Meanwhile, Rome's power only expanded. After Antiochus's downfall, Hannibal remained on the run. He became a shadow moving across Asia Minor, constantly chased by Roman agents demanding his capture at every harbor. Still, wherever he appeared, he left rumors, legends, and terror behind. The name Hannibal continued to send shivers through Roman hearts. Despite losing battles, he stood as a symbol of resistance, a solitary defiance against imperial pride. He could not raise new forces. He had no territory, no influence, merely a brilliant mind, a long-lasting legacy, and enemies who never ceased to track him. By this time, he was in his 60s, his hair graying, his strength faded from decades of conflict and exile. Even so, Hannibal remained sharper than most generals alive. Yet Rome's hunger for his downfall persisted. They sought to erase him not only from power or combat, but from history itself. Thus they came for him one last time, and Hannibal truly. By the early 2nd century before the Common Era, Hannibal had become both a living legend and a dangerous threat, not only to Rome, but also to every kingdom that dared to offer him refuge. At this point he was hiding in Bithynia, a small kingdom in Asia Minor, governed by King Prusias I. Always the tactician, Hannibal assisted the king in winning a naval battle using a clever tactic from his vast experience. Catapults were loaded with clay jars filled with venomous snakes and launched onto the enemy ships, spreading panic and disorder. Even in his later years, his mind remained several steps ahead of his foes. However, Rome was uninterested in such tricks. Their goal was to eliminate Hannibal permanently. They exerted pressure on King Prusias, sent emissaries, and issued threats. Eventually, news arrived that Hannibal's haven had been compromised. Roman agents were closing in on the villa where he sought refuge. He chose not to flee this time. According to legend, Hannibal always carried a small vial of poison concealed in a ring as a safeguard. If the Romans trapped him like a wild animal, he would take his fate into his own hands. When the moment came, he reportedly left a brief message before ingesting the poison. Let us relieve the Romans of their long anxiety, since they find it too tedious to wait for an old man's passing. Just like that, his story ended. Hannibal Barca, the greatest fear Rome had ever known, did not die on a battlefield, but passed away in exile in a foreign land, hunted and isolated. Yet even in death, the Romans were unable to erase his memory. They demolished his city and later rebuilt Carthage several decades afterward during the Third Punic War, even sowing its fields with salt. Yet he was never erased from memory. Hundreds of years later, Roman historians, individuals who ought to have despised him, described his genius with reverence. He commanded from the very front lines, resisted overwhelming opposition, and outmaneuvered countless Roman leaders dispatched to capture him. He traversed the Alps accompanied by elephants, wreaked havoc across Italy for many years, and instilled the most formidable military force in history with a dread it could not rid itself of. Throughout it all, he remained loyal to a single principle, a vow from his youth to never ally with Rome. Even in exile and after death, Hannibal triumphed in a different conflict, the battle for remembrance. In this struggle, his name stands unbeaten. Each autumn in ancient Greece, a remarkable change would overtake the area between Athens and the modest town of Eleusis. The roads became crowded with pilgrims chanting prayers, wisps of smoke, and the scent of incense filled the hillsides. Then, enveloped by shadows, amid the flicker of torchlight and guarded secrecy, a sacred and forbidden event occurred. This was the Eleusinian Mysteries, the most renowned and enigmatic religious festival of antiquity. It was far more than a mere celebration. It served as a profound spiritual initiation. Unlike the raucous Dionysian celebrations or the openly public spectacles of the Olympic Games, this ceremony was governed by strict and absolute rules. To break the silence or reveal what transpired inside the holy sanctuary was punishable by death. This was the essence of the festival. The story revolves around Deita, the goddess of harvest, and her daughter, Persephone. In the legend, Persephone was taken away by Hades, the ruler of the underworld. Grief-stricken, Deita caused the crops across the land to wither as a sign of her sorrow. Eventually, an agreement was reached in which Persephone would spend part of the year below the earth and part above it. This tale became a profound symbol representing the cycle of agriculture, death and rebirth, decay and renewal. However, the mysteries surrounding this myth extended beyond farming. For the ancient Greeks, it represented more than just agriculture. It concerned the destiny of the human soul. Those involved, called Mai, embarked on a multi-day ritual journey that included fasting, bathing in the sea, and carrying sacred items. Upon reaching Eleusis, they entered the Telesterion, a magnificent hall where the most secret rites were performed. The exact nature of these experiences remains uncertain. Some suggest there was a symbolic reenactment of Persephone's return, while others argue it was a visionary event, possibly enhanced by a trance-inducing beverage named Kikon. Regardless of the details, the experience left participants profoundly transformed. Famous individuals such as Emperor Hadrian and philosopher Plato participated in the Eleusinian mysteries and came away believing that death did not mark an end. This was a form of religion focused not on strict rules, but on personal transformation, a sacred engagement with the natural cycles of life, loss, and renewal. Remarkably, the Eleusinian mysteries persisted for over 1,000 years, outlasting many other ancient traditions. For many empires, this continued until a remarkable change occurred with the rise of Christianity. The ancient gods were condemned, and the mysteries of Eleusis vanished forever. No one ever dared to break the vow of silence surrounding these secrets. Consequently, the enigma has endured through time. While Greece shrouded its sacred ceremonies in secrecy, ancient Egypt chose a much more extravagant approach. Their religion was displayed openly, and no celebration exemplified this better than the annual Opet festival in the magnificent city of Thebes. The Opet festival stood as one of the most splendid religious occasions in ancient Egypt. Its goal was to renew the pharaoh's divine spirit and reinforce his holy connection with the gods, particularly Amun-Ra, the chief god of Thebes. The festival began at the grand temple of Karnak, where the powerful god Amun, his consort Mut, and their son Khonsu, known as the Theban Triad, were worshipped. Priests transported their sacred statues, carefully enclosed within golden shrines, on special ceremonial boats called barks. These were no ordinary vessels. They were enormous, richly decorated, and often carried through the streets on the shoulders of many priests. Eventually, the barks were set afloat on the Nile River itself. Their final destination, the Luxor Temple, lay nearly 2 kilometers away and was connected to Karnak by a magnificent avenue lined with hundreds of Sphinx statues. The procession between the temples was anything but quiet or somber. It was lively, dramatic, and bursting with elaborate display. Dancers, musicians, acrobats, and chanting priests filled the thoroughfares. Ordinary people flocked not only to observe, but eagerly to join in the celebration. For many Egyptians, this event represented their opportunity to witness the divine presence not concealed within the temple's inner chambers, but displayed openly, proudly, and magnificently throughout the city. This was more than just a spectacle. The pharaoh actively participated in the procession, often engaging in sacred dramatizations. At certain times, it was believed that the god Amun spiritually united with the pharaoh during the ceremony, renewing his divine right to rule. Power was reaffirmed not through battle, but by cosmic endorsement. Additionally, there was a profoundly human dimension. During the festival, the usual strict separation between priest and commoner, deity and mortal, became more relaxed. People celebrated with feasting, drinking, and dancing. It was euphoria enveloped in spirituality, a fleeting moment when the heavens seemed to meet the earth. The Opet festival lasted between 11 and 27 days, depending on the era and the pharaoh's budget. Each celebration had its unique character, yet conveyed the same message. Egypt was in harmony, the gods were content, and the divine order of Ma'at prevailed. To the Egyptians, this meant everything. If the Eleusinian mysteries dealt with sacred revelations and the Opet festival with royal sanctity, then Saturnalia was an entirely different affair. It was a week-long celebration where Rome joyfully set aside its usual restrictions. Taking place every December in honor of Saturn, the Roman deity of agriculture, time, and liberation, Saturnalia was a deeply ingrained festival that marked the conclusion of the harvest and evoked a sense of nostalgia. Yearning for the legendary Golden Era when Saturn reigned and all people were free and equal, the Romans once attempted to recreate that vision for a few unruly days. The festivities started with a ritual at Saturn's temple in the Forum, followed by a communal banquet. During this time, conventional social roles were completely reversed. Masters took on the role of serving their slaves. Senators abandoned their usual togas for colorful tunics. Activities like gambling, which were typically forbidden, became openly allowed. Work came to a halt. Educational institutions closed their doors. The legal courts ceased operations. The city of Rome operated in an entirely different manner, at least not as it normally did. One of the most peculiar customs of the celebration was the selection of a Saturnalian king, or sometimes called the Lord of Misrule. This person was often someone of low social rank, a slave, or even a child, who was humorously bestowed with the power to give out ridiculous orders. Commands such as sing naked in the streets or balance a plate on your head were common. Following these absurd instructions was part of the entertainment. Additionally, Saturnalia was a time when people exchanged presents like wax candles, small statues, and even verses of poetry. The atmosphere was joyful, filled with laughter, and had a heartfelt warmth that feels strangely familiar. In fact, many historians believe that Saturnalia is one of the cultural forebears of the modern Christmas holiday. The timing, the gift-giving, the candlelight, and the feasting all resonate across the ages. However, Saturnalia was more than just a festival. It served as a safety valve in a society deeply divided, with slaves at the lowest level and senators at the highest. For a short time, it created the illusion that everyone was on equal footing, offering a brief escape from the strict social order. Perhaps, just perhaps, there might be a chance for a return to Saturn's legendary Golden Era. Naturally, once the festival concluded, everything immediately returned to normal. Slaves resumed their duties. The Senate picked up its usual disputes. The streets fell silent once again. Yet, throughout that brief period of upheaval, Rome transformed into a realm of laughter, disorder, and collective humanity. Even an empire requires moments to step away from pretending it has total control. Long before modern devices like alarm clocks and New Year's countdowns existed, ancient Persians were already observing a celebration centered on renewal, balance, and fire, an event that continues to this day. Novus, the Persian New Year, rooted deeply in Zoroastrianism, one of the earliest monotheistic faiths. Novus was far more than simply flipping a page in the calendar. It symbolized the spring equinox, a time when daylight and darkness are flawlessly balanced. For Zoroastrians, this balance represented the never-ending battle between Ahura Mazda, the embodiment of light and order, and Angra Mainyu, the power of darkness and disorder. The occasion stood as a sign of light triumphing over darkness, purity overcoming corruption, and optimism prevailing over hopelessness. Preparations started several weeks beforehand. Houses were tidied, walls scrubbed clean, and debts cleared. This was not ordinary spring cleaning, but a ritual purification of the spirit. Everything unclean or chaotic had to be removed. Fires were ignited in courtyards and along city defenses. On the night before the New Year, people jumped over the flames, yelling aloud, "Give me your red color, take away my illness." The fire held sacred significance in this ceremony. Zoroastrian faith viewed fire not merely as warmth and brightness, but as a symbol of purification. Then appeared the Haft Sin arrangement, a kind of altar comprising 7 emblematic items, each starting with the Persian letter corresponding to Es Sabze, representing sprouted greens symbolizing growth. Sur, garlic, stood for protection. Senjed, the dried fruit, symbolized love. Sirke, vinegar, embodied wisdom among other meanings. Every single item reflected a moral or cosmic principle. Fire temples hosted special rituals during this festival. Zoroastrian priests dressed in white recited hymns from the Avesta, their sacred scriptures, while offering aromatic woods to the everlasting holy flame. For the followers, this period was a chance to ponder, reconnect with truth, welcome renewal, and embrace the turning of the universal cycle. Yet, the celebration was not only serious, but full of joy. Families came together, tables were abundantly filled with delicacies, children received presents, and musicians filled the streets with lively sounds of drums and flutes. In a culture that cherished cosmic harmony, this moment represented a restart not just of the calendar, but of the spirit itself. Nowruz persisted through many empires. It was observed by the Achaemenids, Parthians, and Sassanids, and still thrives today across Iran, Central Asia, and beyond. Very few ancient religious festivals have lasted this long. Perhaps this is because so few are crafted with such grace around something as timeless and universal as the return of light to the world. In ancient Athens, worship was not always about incense and quiet reverence. At times it involved masks, wine, and a deity who truly knew how to celebrate. Dionysus, the deity of wine, fertility, theater, and divine madness, was celebrated with unmatched energy during the grand festival known as the Dionysia, held each spring. This event was far from being a minor religious festivity. It ranked among the most significant public celebrations in Athens. Instead of sacrificing animals or somber rituals, the gods were honored through dramatic performances. The festival commenced with a vibrant parade through the city streets. Citizens carried enormous phallic emblems and waved ivy-adorned rods while chanting hymns, escorting a statue of Dionysus to the Theater of Dionysus, situated at the base of the Acropolis. Music from flutes, dancers' movements, and an overwhelming wave of wine-driven excitement filled the air. Following the procession, the heart of the festival unfolded with several days of theatrical contests. Playwrights competed by presenting 3 tragedies and 1 satyr play each. These were not mere entertainment. These performances were state-sponsored ceremonies, judged by respected citizens and witnessed by crowds that could reach 15,000 attendees at once. Attending was considered a civic responsibility, and in some cases, prisoners were temporarily freed to witness the plays. The stories explored themes such as gods, destiny, pride, vengeance, war, and human suffering. Renowned dramatists like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides crafted tales that deeply moved the audience. Picture watching Oedipus realize he had married his own mother while sitting alongside your neighbors, their faces expressing shock and horror. This experience transcended entertainment. It was a spiritual cleansing. After the intense tragedies, the festival continued with comedies that were often bawdy, politically charged, and absurd. Aristophanes, one of the leading comic playwrights, skillfully used humor to comment on social and political issues, adding a lighter but still thought-provoking dimension to the celebrations. Satirizing politicians, challenging war, and critically examining society itself, nothing was beyond critique. Yet, at its essence, Dionysia meant far more than mere performance. It represented stepping beyond oneself, dismantling the facade society compels us to wear, and donning actual masks to reveal truths that otherwise remained unspoken. This festival was madness imbued with profound significance. Dionysus was not a tranquil or disciplined deity. He embodied wildness, untamed nature, acting as a link between civilization and humanity's primal origins. Dionysia allowed this raw side of human nature to breathe freely, to express emotions through shouting, laughter, and sorrow. For Athenians, this celebration was not escapism. It was a sacred ritual reflecting the human soul, with a cup of wine in hand, and the god of ecstatic transformation observing from backstage. Among ancient religious celebrations, few rival the rambunctious, theatrical, and spiritually subversive nature of Purim. This Jewish festival blends survival narrative, political satire, and divine irony. Purim recalls the story from the Book of Esther, set during the Persian Empire under King Ahasuerus, likely Xerxes II. The plot unfolds much like a drama akin to Dionysia's great spectacles. Esther, a Jewish maiden who conceals her background, rises to become queen and courageously risks her life to thwart a genocidal scheme orchestrated by Haman, the king's advisor, aimed at eradicating the Jewish people. She succeeds in her mission, and Haman is executed on the gallows he prepared for others, securing salvation for the Jewish community. This tale emphasizes the reversal of fortune, the subtle workings of divine intervention, and the transformative power of bravery. However, unlike solemn religious ceremonies, Purim bursts with pure, unrestrained happiness. It is a festive tribute to endurance that embraces laughter and freedom. The celebration kicks off with a public recitation of the Megillah, the Book of Esther, frequently delivered as a humorous theatrical performance. Each time Haman's name appears, the audience drowns it out with groggers, clamor, drinking, and loud cheers. Children don costumes portraying Esther, Mordecai, or even Haman himself, inviting a playful atmosphere filled with dress-up and joyful disorder. Following this lively start, the festival moves through essential rituals, sharing opulent meals, exchanging food gifts among friends, giving charity to those in need, and famously drinking until the distinction between blessed is Mordecai and cursed is Haman becomes blurred. This tradition, surprisingly, is actually recorded in the Talmud. Yet beneath the merriment lies a meaningful truth. Unlike many Jewish holidays, the name of God never appears in the Book of Esther. Not a single time. This unique omission challenges readers to discover divine guidance in subtle ways. It teaches faith even in the absence of explicit miracles. Purim reveals that wondrous outcomes can occur quietly behind royal palace walls through bravery, daring, and unexpected champions. Therefore, the people celebrate with costumes, satire, masks, and storytelling. They openly laugh at the threat of death, ridicule the villain, and in doing so, reaffirm a deeply spiritual message. Survival is sacred, and joy itself acts as a form of defiance. In the misty hills and beyond, this festival pulses as a vibrant testament to courage and resilience. In the forested valleys of ancient Ireland, the start of August signified a sacred and deeply communal celebration. Lugnasad, pronounced Lughnasadh, was the Celtic festival dedicated to Lugh, the god of light, skill, and battle. Unlike the opulent temple ceremonies of Rome or Egypt, Lugnasad took place in open air, on hilltops, in meadows, and near sacred wells. It was not about imperial grandeur. It centered on the land, the harvest, and the delicate pact between humans and the environment. Lugh, the festival's namesake, was a solar deity, a radiant warrior, and a master of many crafts. However, Lughnasadh was more than direct worship of this god. According to legend, Lugh initiated the first festival to honor his foster mother, Tile II, who died from exhaustion after clearing the plains of Ireland to prepare the land for farming. To commemorate her, people gathered to express gratitude for the initial grain harvest and to ensure the earth's continued generosity. The celebration began with a ritual cutting of the first grain sheaf, followed by offerings made to the gods and spirits inhabiting the land. This was not mere symbolism, for a failed harvest meant a harsh winter ahead. Expressing thanks and performing rituals acted as spiritual protection. Lughnasadh was also a vibrant social event. People came from far and wide to join fairs, markets, competitive contests, and athletic games. These were often called the Tailtean Games, seen as a mystical forerunner to the Olympic Games. Events included running, among other athletic challenges, creating a lively atmosphere of rivalry and camaraderie. Wrestling matches, horse races, and even contests of poetry and storytelling were common. It was also a popular occasion for trial marriages. Couples could enter into a commitment lasting 1 year and 1 day. If things did not work out, they could simply part ways by standing back to back and walking in opposite directions. The gods apparently accepted such agreements without objection. There were bonfires, feasts, and dancing on sacred hills. Yet beneath the lively competition there was a quiet recognition that nature both gives and takes away. Lughnasadh was both a celebration and a cautionary reminder. It was a time to enjoy the first harvest, but also to begin preparing for the coming darker months. In a world governed by seasons, this festival symbolized the transition from light to shadow. The wheat was in hand, but winter was already waiting. In the heart of the Indian subcontinent, as winter fades into spring, a burst of color, music, and fire fills villages, towns, and cities. It is loud, wild, and sacred. This is Holi, one of the most joyful and meaningful festivals in ancient Hindu tradition. Today it is famous for clouds of colored powder and playful water fights, yet it carries profound religious and mythological significance. At its core, it honors the triumph of good over evil, the coming of spring, and the burning away of the old to welcome renewal. The festivities begin the night before the color celebrations with Holika Dahan, the ceremonial bonfire. Its origin is rooted in the story of Prahlada, a devoted follower. This story tells of the god Vishnu and his demon father named Kashipu, who insisted on being worshipped in his place. When Prahlada declined, his father schemed to kill him by setting him on the lap of his sister Holika, who was immune to fire. However, divine justice had different plans. Holika was burned, while Prahlada remained completely unharmed. Each year, effigies of Holika are set ablaze in bonfires all across India. The flames stand for the destruction of pride, hatred, and evil, as well as the purifying power of light and heat on the soul. Following the fire, the celebration of color begins. The next day, streets turn into vibrant mosaics of color. People throw gulal, brightly colored powders, at each other, soak friends with colored water, and dance to the rhythm of drums and flutes. It is impossible to stay clean or serious. Yet this energetic chaos is a sacred disorder. Social divisions fade away. Wealth and poverty, age groups, men and women, all become equals, covered in layers of red, green, blue, and yellow. Enemies make peace, strangers form bonds. For a single day the world is transformed beyond recognition and in a magnificent way. Holi is also linked to the legend of Krishna and Rud. Krishna, self-aware about his dark skin, playfully applied color to Rud's fair complexion. Their divine love story has become an everlasting symbol of joyful love and spiritual unity. That is why Holi represents not just fire and cleansing. It embraces teasing, happiness, and warmth. Beneath the celebration lies a deeper spiritual message about the cycles of nature and the strength of the human spirit. The soul, along with the wonder found in accepting impermanence, shines brightly. Once the flames settle and the vibrant hues disappear from your skin, what stays with you is the profound message Holi aimed to convey. Light returns, happiness holds a sacred place, and transformation is always near. In the midst of roaring Roman armies and grand imperial processions, There was a ceremony so secretive and selective that even Rome's most influential men were prohibited from being present. No senators, no priests, no emperors, only women were allowed. This was the celebration of Bona Dea, the benevolent goddess. It took place every December at the residence of Rome's chief magistrate. The festival blended religious devotion with mystery, honoring a goddess linked to fertility, healing, purity, and the earth itself. Her precise origins and roles remained mysterious, and that was intentional. Everything surrounding Bona Dea was shrouded in feminine secrecy. The rites were performed by the Vestal Virgins, Rome's most revered priestesses, with attendance restricted to noble Roman women alone. Men were forbidden not only from partaking, but even from learning about the rituals. In fact, no male historians were aware of the ceremony's details. Our understanding, though limited, comes from scandal. In 62 BCE, the festival became a public uproar. That year, Julius Caesar, serving as Pontifex Maximus, was responsible for hosting the rites in his home, as was tradition, though he was not permitted to attend. Instead, his wife Pompeia took charge of the women-only celebration. Events took an unexpected twist when a reckless nobleman named Publius Clodius Pulchar disguised himself as a woman and secretly entered the ceremony with the alleged intention of seducing Pompeia. He was discovered, leading to a trial that transformed a private sacred ritual into a public spectacle. Although Clodius was found not guilty, most likely due to bribery, Caesar chose to divorce Pompeia, famously stating that Caesar's wife must remain beyond suspicion. While the scandal is notable, the Bona Dea festival reveals something unique, a sacred realm entirely governed by women where their issues, such as fertility, health, family, and bodily cycles, held central importance in religious practice. It was a rare occasion when Rome's strict patriarchy stepped aside to allow the divine feminine to quietly rule. Symbols like myrtle wreaths associated with Venus and perhaps sexual love were prohibited. Wine was disguised as milk, and music, incense, and offerings accompanied the ceremonies. There might have even been symbolic fertility rites, but no man ever witnessed these moments, nor ever would. Perhaps that was precisely the intention. In a world that recorded nearly everything, the most potent rites were those left unwritten, preserved only through hushed memory. Sacredness sometimes must remain hidden, guarded by silence, passed down through whispers. Long before the medieval fascination with turning lead into gold, alchemy began in the temples and tombs of ancient Egypt. However, it was not called alchemy there. Instead, it was referred to as chemia, the black art, a term that did not denote. There was nothing ominous about the rich, dark soil of the Nile Valley, which the ancient Egyptians called Kemet, meaning the black land. For them, transformation went beyond the physical realm. It held deep sacred significance. This concept did not only concern the body, but extended to the soul as well. The ancient Egyptians were highly skilled in applied chemistry. They crafted cosmetics, perfumes, glass, dyes, and metal mixtures. Their embalming methods were sophisticated, involving resins, salts, and linen to ensure the body's preservation for eternity. However, these actions were more than just medical treatments. They held a ritualistic purpose with divine meaning. Every step in mummification, every pigment crushed into paint, was part of a universal process aimed at readying both body and soul for a new existence beyond death. Death itself was regarded as a form of alchemical transformation. Similar to how metals were purified by fire, the deceased soul had to undergo refinement through tests in the underworld. The Book of the Dead, filled with spells and incantations, served as a spiritual map to help navigate this process of inner change. At the heart of Egyptian belief was the god Thoth, depicted with the head of an ibis, who embodied wisdom, writing, and sacred knowledge. When Greek and Egyptian cultures blended during the Ptolemaic era, Thoth became linked to the Greek god Hermes, resulting in the legendary figure Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes. Hermes Trismegistus became famed as the mystical author of Hermetic writings that established alchemy not only as a craft, but as a profound spiritual discipline. These teachings shaped the philosophical foundation of alchemy as a path toward deeper understanding and transformation of both the earthly and the divine. The writings did not only discuss physical processes, but also portrayed a divine harmony between the vast universe and the tiny world within. The phrase, "as above, so below," captures this beautifully. In Egyptian alchemy, changing matter symbolized the soul's inner transformation. Turning ordinary metals into gold served as a metaphor for refining an imperfect self into a purified being. Therefore, when later practitioners in Greece and Europe sought the legendary philosopher's stone or eternal life, they were continuing an ancient Egyptian belief. Genuine transformation begins not in the laboratory, but within the heart. While Egypt contributed the spiritual and ceremonial aspects of alchemy, ancient Persia provided its ethical foundation and a cosmic perspective based on a timeless conflict between forces of light and darkness. Long before medieval laboratories appeared, the teachings of Zoroaster shaped a worldview where transformation was essential rather than optional. His dualistic philosophy divided existence into two opposing powers, Ahura Mazda, representing light, truth, and order, and Angra Mainyu, embodying darkness and chaos. This was more than myth. It formed a metaphysical framework that deeply influenced alchemical thought. Zoroastrians practiced worship through fire, a living symbol of truth and divine enlightenment. In their temples, sacred flames were kept burning perpetually. Fire purified, revealed, and transformed, just as the alchemist's furnace would centuries later. The Persians also made substantial advances in this sacred tradition. Metalworking methods. They stood among the pioneers in perfecting copper, silver, and gold, mastering iron smelting, and exploring the possibilities of alloys. Their craftsmen were more than mere artisans. They were regarded as initiates in a journey of enhancing nature itself. Transforming ore into gleaming metal was seen as a cosmic act, lifting raw and chaotic materials into a state of order and purity. Even the oldest Persian medical writings reveal early alchemical thinking, containing lists of minerals, metals, plants, and their influences on the human body. Their goal was not only to cure physical ailments, but also to harmonize the body with the universe's divine balance. In later times, Islamic scholars would safeguard and build upon Persian alchemical knowledge. However, even before Islam, a profound theme began to emerge that resonated through alchemical practices across Arabia and Europe. This notion claimed that matter is fluid and dynamic, and within every imperfect substance lies the potential for perfection. This concept later fueled the alchemist's quest to transform base metals like lead into gold or elevate the soul from a crude state to a divine one. Persian philosophy introduced a spiritual alchemy focused on purification not only of materials, but of motives as well. Fire did more than melt metals, it consumed falsehood and unveiled hidden truths. Persian alchemists believed that in the concealed heart of matter, amid smoke and spirit, rested a divine spark capable of transforming everything, even the self. If ancient Egypt bestowed alchemy with its sacred rituals, Persia gifted it a profound spiritual essence. The moral system that dominated originated in ancient Greece, where thinkers sought to explain everything through reason, geometry, and a hint of cosmic pride. Alchemy did not simply disappear during this time. Instead, it transformed. Greek philosophers integrated the mystical and chemical knowledge inherited from earlier cultures and aimed to rationalize it. Rather than using crucibles and mixtures, they turned to philosophy. Central to Greek alchemical beliefs was the concept of four elements: earth, water, air, and fire, first introduced by Empedocles. These were not merely physical materials, but represented the foundational aspects of the cosmos, the essential building blocks of all existence. According to this perspective, transformation occurred through the reorganization of these elements. Fire could shift into air, water might turn into earth, illustrating a continuous flow of change. Subsequent thinkers such as Plato expanded these ideas with deeper significance. He portrayed matter as being composed of perfect geometric shapes, tiny invisible solids. Thus, alchemy became more than practical chemistry. It became a pursuit of aligning with an ideal perfect world. Aristotle then revolutionized the theory by suggesting that all matter possessed four inherent qualities: heat, cold, moisture, and dryness. By altering these properties, a substance could be fundamentally transformed. For example, lead was considered dry and heavy, while gold was balanced and luminous. If lead's qualities could be modified, it was believed it might theoretically turn into gold. This concept of transmutation, or turning one material into another, sounds very familiar even today. Transforming one substance into another became the foundation for all subsequent alchemical practices. However, the Greeks did not limit themselves to mere theory. In Hellenistic Alexandria, a vibrant fusion of Egyptian mysticism, Greek philosophy, and Babylonian astronomy, alchemy began to evolve as a practical discipline. Scholars and mystics noted down some of the earliest recipes for dyes, perfumes, and metal mixtures, always cloaked in symbolic language. It was during this time that the legendary figure Hermes Trismegistus appeared, a blend of the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek god Hermes, credited with authoring the Hermetic texts. These writings discussed the purification not only of physical substances, but also of the soul, encouraging followers to pursue divine unity through inner transformation. For the Greeks, alchemy was not about generating wealth. It represented an effort to comprehend nature, reflect the cosmos, and refine the self by uncovering the secret principles that govern reality. This elevated alchemy beyond mere science to something dangerously close to divine authority. In the thriving port city of Alexandria, alchemy discovered its true place of experimentation, both in material substances and in ideas. Founded by Alexander the Great and ruled by the Ptolemies, Alexandria was a place where Greek logic, Egyptian rituals, Babylonian astrology, and Persian philosophical ideas merged into a stimulating intellectual environment. At the core stood the great Library of Alexandria, a beacon of ancient wisdom where scrolls and scholars converged from all over the known world. Within this context, alchemy did not just endure, it flourished and developed into a profound discipline of its own. Alchemy took on both spiritual and practical dimensions, merging the mystical with the experimental. Rituals from Egyptian temples combined with Greek natural philosophy, while Babylonian star charts were examined alongside Greek medical knowledge and Egyptian metalworking. This fusion produced a new form of understanding that was part science and part sacred ceremony. One of the earliest and most enigmatic figures in Alexandrian alchemy was Mary the Jewess. She is known for creating some of the first alchemical tools, including the bain-marie, a double boiler still commonly used in kitchens today, the tribikos, a distillation apparatus, and a method for vapor purification. Her innovations reveal that alchemists engaged in actual chemical practices, not just theoretical speculation. Another significant personality was Zosimos of Panopolis, a 3rd to 4th century CE alchemist whose surviving texts are among the oldest alchemical writings in Greek. However, Zosimos did not view alchemy purely as a physical process. He spoke of dreams, visions, and spiritual cleansing. For him, transforming lead into gold symbolized the soul's purification, turning a corrupted human nature into something divine. He saw the alchemical vessel not only as a container for materials, but as a metaphor for the body, the internal fire, the soul's suffering, and the ascending divine vapor. His work blurred the boundaries between chemistry and mysticism, substance and symbolism. The Alexandrian alchemists also embraced Hermeticism, the philosophy of Hermes Trismegistus, famously expressing the principle, as above, so below. The small universe reflects the vast cosmos. Cleansing, one affects the other. In Alexandria, alchemy evolved beyond mere substances. It delved into the nature of existence itself. It questioned not only the composition of things, but why they could transform and whether the spirit could evolve together with physical matter. Alchemy became a reflection of the universe and our inner selves. Yet this journey was only beginning. After the magnificent library of Alexandria was destroyed and Europe entered the early medieval period, the Islamic world emerged as the new custodian of alchemical wisdom. Between the 8th and 13th centuries under the Abbasid Caliphate, the Islamic Golden Age turned cities such as Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba into hubs of scientific and philosophical exploration. Texts from Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions were quickly translated into Arabic, including essential alchemical works. However, here is an important twist. Islamic thinkers did more than safeguard ancient alchemy. They reinvented it. Introducing Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in Western tradition as Geber. This polymath flourished in 8th century Kufa. Often regarded as the founder of chemistry, his work remains surrounded by enigma. Jabir authored hundreds of texts that combined Greek elemental ideas, Persian spirituality, and Quranic views of the universe into a coherent scientific system. He developed a methodical approach to experiments. He proposed that all metals consist of sulfur and mercury, rather than, not in a literal manner, but as symbolic principles. Sulfur symbolized combustion and transformation, while mercury represented fluidity and unpredictability. Jabir proposed that by balancing these two elements, one could convert one metal into another. He also pioneered methods still familiar today, such as distillation, crystallization, sublimation, filtration, and calcination. The devices he developed became the foundation for laboratories throughout the medieval period. However, Islamic alchemy was more than just a technical pursuit. It preserved the spiritual essence of its earlier origins. Alchemy was regarded as a journey toward divine insight. Changing physical substances served as a metaphor for cleansing the soul and harmonizing with the divine order of the cosmos. Later figures in alchemy, like Al-Razi and Avicenna, engaged in debates over alchemy's validity. Al-Razi supported it by highlighting its useful applications in medicine. Conversely, Avicenna criticized the concept of metal transformation, but valued alchemy's philosophical and ethical dimensions. Despite their disagreements, these scholars elevated alchemy beyond a secretive art. It became a combination of early chemistry, metaphysics, spiritual practice, and moral philosophy. Eventually, European academics rediscovered Arabic manuscripts, translated them into Latin, and revived alchemy in Western culture. Yet the essence of this craft, the belief in the reflection of spirit within matter, was preserved, refined, and organized by Muslim intellectuals. In their care, it flourished into a profound intellectual tradition. Alchemy ceased to be mere legend and began its transformation into a true science. When the translated texts of Arabic alchemists such as Jabir ibn Hayyan, Al-Razi, and Avicena found their way into Europe during the 12th century, an extraordinary revival occurred. Alchemy experienced a rebirth under the shadowy stone towers of medieval monasteries and universities. Europe had been in a state of intellectual dormancy, yet with the emergence of translation centers in places like Toledo and Sicily, Latin-speaking scholars unlocked a vast reservoir of forgotten knowledge. Among these were alchemical manuscripts filled with cryptic symbols, enigmatic ingredients, and bold promises of transformation. The Europeans became fascinated by this knowledge. For them, alchemy represented far more than just the pursuit of gold. It symbolized access to wisdom, power, and even everlasting life. The sought-after philosopher's stone emerged as the ultimate prize, believed to have the power to convert ordinary metals into gold and grant eternal existence. However, it was more than a mere physical object. It embodied the ideal harmony of both matter and spirit. Medieval alchemists embraced this dual significance with great seriousness. Notable figures like Albertus Magnus and Roger Bacon were both religious men and empirical researchers. They were convinced that the divine secrets of creation were inscribed in the natural world, and that alchemy was the key to deciphering this sacred text. For these pioneers, alchemy was not magic or witchcraft. It was a form of Christian natural philosophy designed to comprehend the divine arrangement of the universe through the alteration of physical substances. Their laboratories became the monastic enclosures of knowledge and discovery. Fire and glass, retorts, the Olympic spirit, crucibles, and furnaces brimming with substances such as sulfur, mercury, antimony, and lead. These experiments were documented in encrypted writings, rich with allegories and symbolic language. This tradition made alchemy appear mysterious and difficult to understand. Yet beneath this coated veil, genuine scientific efforts were underway. One of the most prominent figures from this time was Pseudo Geber, an enigmatic Latin author who transformed Arabic works into European contexts. His writings became essential sources for future alchemists. Another notable figure was Arnold of Villanova, who combined medicine with alchemy, concentrating on crafting elixirs believed to cure and renew the body. Despite the secrecy surrounding it, medieval alchemy was far from hidden. It was a subject of debate in universities, funded by nobles, and practiced by clergy. Still, although many pursued spiritual goals, a considerable number sought gold, sometimes literally, other times symbolically. Thus, medieval Europe kept the transformative flame alive, a blend of faith, fire, and a philosophical vision. Transitioning from the Middle Ages into the Renaissance, alchemy did not vanish. Instead, it evolved, becoming more secret, more symbolic, and, curiously, more mystical. This fusion of Hermetic thought, Christian mysticism, and Renaissance humanism gave rise to one of the most intriguing movements in alchemical history, the Rosicrucians. In the early 17th century, anonymous manifestos started to circulate. Throughout Europe, there emerged writings such as Farmer, Fraternitatis, Confessatio Fraternitatis, and The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. These works narrated the tale of a secret brotherhood known as the Rosy Cross Fraternity, supposedly established by a legendary figure named Christian Rosenkreutz. He was said to have traveled through the East, acquiring hidden knowledge before returning to Europe to quietly guide those seeking spiritual insight. However, here is the surprising part. There is no proof that the Rosicrucians existed as a real organization, at least initially. They represented an idea, a symbol, yet their impact was significant. Rosicrucian alchemy was never about the simple creation of gold. Its true purpose was enlightenment. This practice blended alchemical transformation with Christian mysticism, interpreting the cleansing of metals as a metaphor for the purification of the soul. The philosopher's stone evolved into a symbol of Christ-like awareness, inner renewal, and unity with the divine. Their manifestos promised a profound reform across science, religion, and governance. They envisioned a covert spiritual revolution, leading humanity into a fresh golden era. Yet they provided no addresses, no names, no formal leadership, only symbols, the rose symbolizing secrecy, beauty, and the cross standing for sacrifice and change. This form of alchemy functioned as a spiritual parable, dense with metaphor and hidden meanings. The Rosicrucians believed truth was concealed not because it was forbidden, but because it required personal growth to uncover. Their doctrines deeply influenced many who sought deeper wisdom beyond the surface of conventional knowledge. Scientists, mystics, artists, and poets all engaged with alchemical ideas. Isaac Newton possessed Rosicrucian writings. Johann Valentine Andrea, believed to be the creator of the chemical wedding, regarded the tale as a symbolic narrative. Nevertheless, it spread rapidly within occult communities. By this period, alchemy had acquired complex layers of significance. For some, it remained focused on physical substances. For others, it symbolized purely metaphorical concepts. To the Rosicrucian order, it represented a spiritual journey concealed in obvious places. Even if their brotherhood was more legendary than real, their impact echoed through time, suggesting that genuine gold lies within the self. As the 17th century advanced, alchemy began to intersect with something unexpected, emerging modern science. However, this connection was not sharply divided. The boundary between alchemist and chemist was often unclear, and many pioneers of the scientific method were paradoxically still in pursuit of the philosopher's stone. A notable example is Isaac Newton. The very man who formulated fundamental laws of motion and gravity dedicated more of his life to the study of alchemy than to physics. In secrecy, he filled journals with mysterious experiments, explored ancient symbols, and sought to reveal the divine workings of the cosmos. For Newton, the universe was a sacred machine, and alchemy was a code written in flames and precious metals to decipher it. Newton was not unique in this pursuit. Robert Boyle, often called the founding father of modern chemistry, was deeply influenced by alchemical ideas as well. His well-known work from the year 1661, the book, The Skeptical Chemist, questioned the ancient theory of four classical elements and established the foundation for chemical analysis. However, Boyle also held the belief in the transformation of metals and regarded alchemy as a legitimate field of study. So, what transformed? The main shift lay in the approach. Alchemy was long hidden behind layers of symbolism, secrecy, and spiritual allegory. Yet the new generation of scientists sought transparency, reproducibility, and proof. They began to abandon the mystical language, opting instead for measurable outcomes. The laboratory, once a place of occult fascination, became a site of quantifiable reactions and precise tools. Instruments like crucibles, flasks, and furnaces adapted and became essential to modern chemistry. The fantasy of converting lead into gold slowly vanished, overtaken by the practical aim of understanding the fundamental components of matter. Still, the alchemical perspective did not completely vanish. The idea that matter can change form, that hidden patterns exist within systems, and that humans can influence nature through profound insight persisted quietly. These alchemical concepts endured under the guise of scientific uniforms instead of ceremonial robes. By the 18th century, alchemy was mostly rejected as pseudoscience. However, history is far from simple. The reality is that contemporary science rests upon alchemical foundations, and alchemists, with their peculiar symbols and seemingly impossible ambitions, contributed more than mere metal tinkering. They posed essential questions about the very nature of reality. The question, is it possible to change the world, continues to inspire scientific inquiry today. By the 19th century, alchemy seemed to have disappeared entirely, dismissed by logical minds as an outdated myth from times before science. Yet, much like mercury sealed in a container, its core never really vanished. Instead, alchemy transformed itself, finding fresh expression in fields such as psychology, literature, art, and even contemporary spirituality. The most unexpected bearer of alchemical wisdom was the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung. For Jung, alchemy was not about turning base metals into gold literally. Rather, it represented a symbolic guide to understanding the human mind. Jung immersed himself in alchemical writings, uncovering in their mysterious images and metaphors a secret language of the unconscious. The philosopher's stone became a metaphor for achieving self-realization. The alchemical stages, calcination, dissolution, fermentation, and coagulation, paralleled the psychological path leading to individuation, the harmonizing of every part of the self. He believed alchemy was the first form of therapy, a spiritual practice masked as ancient chemistry. Its true purpose was never gold, but the healing of the inner being. In this way, alchemy continued to develop without interruption. In literature, alchemy remains alive within stories like Faust, The Alchemist, and numerous fantasy narratives centered on hidden wisdom, transformation, and salvation. Today, alchemy functions as a powerful metaphor in spirituality for inner evolution. It embodies the belief that the hardships of life, when refined, lead to profound personal growth. Wisdom and completeness can emerge even within science, where echoes of ancient ideas persist. The dream of alchemy to comprehend and control the transformation of matter finds a unique parallel in nuclear physics, a field where elements truly can be changed from one to another. Although the alchemists misunderstood the process, their belief in the possibility was not incorrect. Culturally, society still pursues alchemical ambitions, the quest for healing remedies, and the desire for everlasting youth. The allure of alchemy lies not in its unsuccessful methods, but in its creativity, its readiness to believe that the world is changeable, that the lowly can turn into something precious, and that knowledge applied with care can uplift both the body and the spirit. Alchemy did not vanish, it simply evolved. It transformed into chemistry, into psychology, into narrative, and into metaphor. In many ways, it has become part of you. Every time you face challenges, develop, endure pain, improve yourself, and come out stronger, you are conducting your own form of alchemy, not turning lead into gold, but transforming your spirit. This inner process was always the true enchantment of alchemy.